Hey guys, Mike here, the Detroit Borg, with a look at the new Google Play edition of the LG G Pad 8.3. Now, I previously reviewed the full version of the LG G Pad, the one running LG skin of Android, but this is the stock version of Android. If I can get that knock-on feature to work there. So that is the LG G Pad, and if you want to see my full review, as you can see, it just crashed while trying to demonstrate that feature. So if you want to see my full review of the LG G Pad 8.3, I'll post a link in the description below. But anyway, this is sold in the Google Play Store for $349, running the latest version of Android right now, Android 4.4, and basically it's the same hardware, just running a clean version of Android. Now, it's only available in black, has a 16 gig capacity. It's not available with LTE like the Nexus 7. This is only a Wi-Fi device, and it is got the same internal specs as the LG G Pad. So we have the same 1.7 gigahertz quad-core Snapdragon 600 processor, 2 gigs of DDR2 RAM. We have a 5 megapixel autofocusing camera, good for 1080p video at 30 frames per second. We also have a 1.3 megapixel rear-facing camera. Now we have the same 8.3-inch LCD IPS display with a resolution of 1200 by 1920, good for 273 pixels per inch. So a really nice display, but many have complained that it is a little dim compared to something like the Nexus 7 or the iPad mini. Now, if 16 gigs isn't good enough for you, you can expand it thanks to a micro SD card slot, which supports 64 gig cards. Now, of course, you can get this cheaper, or you can get the stock or original LG version cheaper through other retailers. For example, I got this for $329. This is $349, but you can buy even cheaper than that. So you can get it for $279 and that sort of thing from other resellers. So let's go ahead, crack this open, and take a look. So there it is in crumpled plastic. So we have a little tab here to lift up. There you go. We're going to set that aside for just a minute while we take a look at the contents. So we have some paperwork, not literature. I know you guys hate when I use the word literature. So there we go. Google Play Edition Quick Start Guide. As you can see, it's printed by LG. This all comes from LG, just blessed with Google's operating system. So really nice. We also have our wall wart, our charger here, wrapped in plastic, LG branding, and we have our micro USB charging cable. Now, this is a higher capacity charger, by the way, than the standard USB wall wart that you get with your phone. All right, so let's get to our tablet in this little plastic envelope. Slide it out. So you can see we have a little piece of plastic covering the front. That's about it. So let's go ahead and lift that up. Now, taking a close look at the LG G Pad, there is no indication, at least externally or in the design, that it's any different from the standard LG G Pad. Pretty much has the same design, no Google branding here. So if you bring in the white version of the LG G Pad I reviewed, you can see it looks the same, just different coloring. Now, the metal back panel picks up the coloring of the white as well as the front bezel. So you can see black bezel versus white. I'm not sure which one I prefer. I think I prefer the white. I really like that. But this looks also really sharp. Now, this kind of has a bluish slate color. To me, it looks very similar to the slate color from Apple's devices last year, recently replaced with space gray. It's got a nice dark color, kind of a stealthy color. If you look back here, you can see we have our stereo speakers, which are preserved with the Nexus or the stock experience. On the side, you see we have these plastic trim pieces with that nice design to it. Up here, we have that 5 megapixel autofocusing camera, again, good for 1080p at 30 frames per second. Up here, we have that micro SD card slot, supports 64 gig cards. We also have our headphone jack right next to it. On the left side, nothing. On the bottom side, we'll find our microphone as well as a micro USB charging port. On the right side, we'll find our volume rocker as well as our sleep wake button. You can see the volume rocker has one indicator letting you know what's up. And on the top, we have an IR blaster. Unfortunately, there is no software included that works with that IR blaster, so you'll have to install that separately. Now on the front, we have a 1.3 megapixel front-facing camera, good for 720p HD video. We also have our LG branding, and I think we have our ambient light sensor in somewhere in here. As you can see on the white version, it's just to the right of the camera. All right, so let's go ahead and boot this up for the first time. Just going to tap and hold the power button. So we get our new boot animation familiar to Android 4.4. All right, so let's go and take a look at the basic user experience. Now, by default, lock screen widgets are turned off, which is something that Android 4.4 introduced. So you can swipe down on the right to get to your quick access toggles as well as your settings control. So let's get to settings. Let's go to security, enable widgets right there. Now if we go to the lock screen, we can swipe to the right to see all of the widgets. Some of them I've already installed. We can go ahead and add new ones, so we can add Google Keep or whatever we have available to us from that list. Now we do not have the option to open the camera from the lock screen, unfortunately. You can access Google Now by swiping up from the lock screen. It takes you right there. Now because this is a tablet, we can swipe down on the right to get to our settings and quick access toggles. You can swipe down on the left to get to your notification shade. Here you can launch any of your apps as you want. So a pretty familiar experience. We also have these on-screen Android controls, so we can swipe up on our home button to get to Google Now. You can tap on our recent apps to see everything we've loaded previously. Tap on them again to get to them. And of course you can also close them as well by swiping them out of the way, and the back button works as you'd expect. Now for the most part, this looks and acts just like the Nexus 7. It has the same software configuration. They haven't added anything to it like the Z Ultra did or the HTC One did with audio. This is pretty much the stock experience just like the Nexus 7. So nothing really here to look at. You can see if we go to sound, the sound controls are the same. The display settings are the same as well. So they haven't done anything that really differentiates it. Now, like the Nexus 7, this also has landscape orientation on both the lock screen and home screens. So this is also similar to the Sony Z Ultra for the Google Play Store. Now, if we go to the app drawer, you'll find the full suite of Google apps, including Quick Office, which launched with Android 4.4. So this gives us an editor for Word documents, Excel spreadsheets, and PowerPoint presentations. And we have the Hangouts app, Drive, Currents, the calculator, the standard Google Calendar, Chrome, of course, is the default web browser. We have Google Keep, Maps, we have the People app. We also have Photos. So we now, instead of having the Gallery app as well as a Google Plus Photos app, we now just have the Photos app, which merges it all together. So pretty much standard stock experience. We have our folder full of Google apps on the home page, Google Earth, Drive, Play Games, etc. Now taking a look at some of our benchmarks next to the Nexus 7, you can see this does do a better job, but it does have a processor clocked a little higher at 1.73 gigahertz versus 1.51 gigahertz. Both, of course, are quad-core processors, so 641 versus 580, 1996 versus 1848. Generally speaking, that's pretty close. Now, if we compare the LG G Pad to the Nexus 7, obviously it is much bigger than the Nexus 7, but the display is much dimmer. So, for example, if we bring up the same website with the same white space, you can see just how much dimmer the LG G Pad looks in comparison to the Nexus 7. Both displays are set to the same brightness, so if we go to our display settings right here, let's see, right there. You can see they're both set to maximum, so that gives you an idea of the relative screen brightness from the LG G Pad to the Nexus 7. So like a lot of people complain, the LG G Pad is a little dim looking compared to something like the Nexus 7 or even the iPad mini. So again, we bring up our brightness controls just to show you. Again, we have the same brightness. So generally speaking, come on, get out of the way. You can see that the LG G Pad is a little dimmer. Now taking a look at the camera app, it's pretty straightforward stuff for a stock experience. We have tap to focus, and as you can see, you get the little animation indicating that you've successfully focused on your scene. It also adjusts exposure and that sort of thing. You can also change your mode here by changing it to panorama mode. We also have Photosphere, which we're familiar with, allows you to take a photo, kind of coaches you through that. I'm not going to go through that process. You've seen it before. We also have our video camera, so you can record video. And as you're recording a video, you can't snap photos like you can with other software. So you can click stop. You can go to your settings icon up here. This gives you to your settings, as you can see right here. So you can see it's a limited number of settings. It drills down for you. Now you can also tap anywhere on this display to bring up your settings, and it follows your finger to wherever you want to go. And as you can see, it drills down into your settings so you can select more things as you go. Now if we go to the still camera, again, tap anywhere on the screen to focus. You see, get a little animation here. Tap to release the shutter. So pretty standard stuff. Now just to give you an idea of the software differences between the LG G Pad and the stock experience, you can see they pretty much work the same. You have home screens you can swipe through. You have a drop-down menu for your notifications as well as your settings. There are, of course, differences here. So you have a lot more features on the LG G Pad, and a lot of people don't like this heavy-handed skin over Android, which I'm one of those people. I prefer not to have a lot of this, but some of them are quite useful, such as these quick access toggles. You have much fewer of them on the stock experience. And in fact, many of them take you right out of the menu app. So for example, if you want to change brightness, it leaves that drop-down menu. In this case, I can change brightness while staying within the drop-down shade. So those are features that are useful. Many of the other features are not particularly useful, so I prefer to live without them, particularly if it means I get the latest version of Android and a smoother experience. Now, I can't really complain about the LG G Pad besides its habit of restarting and crashing on certain things, but overall performance is pretty smooth and quick, and you still get a lot of features to use if you prefer. Of course, you don't have to use them if you don't want to, but ultimately I prefer the look and feel of stock. Now, although we have stereo speakers on the back, they are rear firing, so they can't really compete with the front firing stereo speakers on something like the Nexus 10, which are one of the better sounding tablets.
No. The housings are misaligned. There's no way we can redirect the power.
Now, I know a lot of people are going to ask, which device do I prefer, the LG G Pad or the Nexus 7? Now, the Nexus 7 I think has a really nice design, even though it's made mostly out of plastic, while the LG G Pad is made out of metal. There's something to be said for this unibody design with that nice texture on the back versus this more parted design on the LG G Pad with the contrasting plastic and metal. So, I mean, they're using nicer materials on the LG G Pad, but I really can't fault the design of the Nexus 7 with that nice tapered edge. It's a little simpler, and I think a nice looking design. So I really don't look at the Nexus 7 as a cheap device or a cheap looking device. It's just a nice design that happens to be cheap. So anyway, the LG G Pad is also a lot more expensive, $350 versus $229 for the Nexus 7. And the Nexus 7 is a really good device. It has a beautiful display. It's brighter than the LG G Pad. It's also got the same resolution. So 1920 over 1200 over a 7-inch display gives you a higher pixel density. So 323 versus 273 on the LG G Pad. So you get a better quality display. It's just smaller on the Nexus 7. But for me, I prefer the screen size of the LG G Pad 8.3. I find this a more useful screen size than something like the 7-inch tablet because my phones are getting bigger and bigger. So I don't really find a need to carry around a separate tablet that isn't too much bigger than my phone. So I actually find this preferable now versus something like the 7-inch tablets that have kind of been popular up until this point. So this also more closely resembles something like the iPad mini, which is a form factor I prefer. Now the iPad mini has slightly different dimensions, but generally speaking it's similar in size. So this is a 7.9-inch display versus 8.3, but you can see it's a 4:3 aspect ratio, so it's generally a larger display. It's just wider in terms of its portrait aspect versus its landscape aspect. So it looks larger than something like the 8.3 here. So from my perspective, I'm